Buddy Ebsen once stood right on the edge of becoming the most famous Tin Man in movie history, and he almost died because of that very same role. He breathed in aluminum dust while they were filming The Wizard of Oz, ended up in the hospital inside an oxygen tent, and got replaced within just a few days. From that one terrible moment, a rising MGM star fell into a long stretch of silence, stuck under contract, pushed to the edges of the whole studio system, and carrying breathing problems in his lungs for the rest of his entire life. What looked like an amazing opportunity turned into a scar that never fully healed on his career. And honestly, that was only just the beginning of everything he would have to go through. But the man did not simply disappear and give up. Buddy Ebsen came back completely reborn on television as Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies, pulling in up to 60 million viewers every single week. Then he transformed himself all over again into a calm and sharp aging detective in Barnaby Jones, proving to everyone watching that real charisma does not live in being young, but in being tough enough to survive everything life throws at you. An actor who was once literally forced out of a legendary movie went on to build a career that stretched across more than 7 full decades, going all the way from vaudeville and Broadway stages to Hollywood and then straight to the very top of television. Talent, tragedy, serious injury, and a determination that simply refused to quit all got tangled together to shape a life that was full of contradictions layered on top of each other. A star who almost got forgotten completely. A private father trying to raise his kids underneath the blazing glare of stage lights. A man who got pushed out of his own dream but could never bring himself to actually walk away from performing. To really understand why a person could rise back up after falling that hard, you have to go much further back in time to a small town, long before the lights of Hollywood ever touched his name or knew he existed. Buddy Ebsen was born on April 2, 1908 in Belleville, Illinois, and his full real name was Christian Rudolph Ebsen Jr. He did not grow up surrounded by film sets or inside a family of famous performers. Instead, he grew up in a household where art existed in its most simple and honest form. His father, Christian Ebsen Sr., was a choreographer born in Germany who believed deeply in physical discipline and the real power of movement. He ran a dance studio and also managed a swimming pool for the local school district. His mother, Frances, was a Baltic German painter who brought a quiet richness of images and creativity right into their home. Buddy's 4 sisters all grew up with music filling the house and the constant sound of feet moving across wooden floors. And the boy in the middle of all of it, not the oldest and not the youngest, learned how to watch carefully, listen closely, and then move with everything he had learned. When Buddy was around 10 years old, the whole family packed up and left Illinois for Florida, first moving to Palm Beach County and then settling in Orlando. There, his father's dance studio became the very center of everything the family did and lived for. He and his sisters did not simply learn a bunch of steps and call it a day. They learned precision, they learned rhythm, and they learned how to stand straight and tall when other people's eyes were fixed directly on them. But beyond the dance floor, Buddy also had another dream quietly growing inside him. He once wanted to become a doctor, and that desire was driven partly by illnesses he had watched affect members of his own family. After graduating from Orlando High School in 1926, he enrolled at the University of Florida and later transferred over to Rollins College, where he was studying pre-medical courses and working toward that medical dream. Then the Florida real estate market completely collapsed, and the Ebsen family, just like so many other families during that rough era, got swept right into serious financial trouble. His father's earlier investments stopped producing the results everyone had counted on. Financial pressure piled up fast and heavy, and Buddy was forced to leave school at just 20 years old. The path toward becoming a doctor did not end because he lacked the ability or the brains for it. It ended because the circumstances around him simply would not allow it to keep going. In the summer of 1928, he left Orlando and headed to New York City with just a little over $20 in his pocket. There were no guarantees waiting for him there, no contracts, nothing signed and ready. All he had were the dance skills he had been sharpening since he was a little kid and a quiet but strong personal resolve. If he could not become a doctor, he was going to find another way to survive and keep moving forward. And if he got lucky along the way, maybe he could rebuild some of what his family had lost. New York did not exactly roll out a red carpet for him when he arrived. The city offered Buddy Ebsen a spot behind a soda fountain counter and late-night shifts in exchange for just enough money to cover rent. The $26 he had carried with him from Orlando quickly became a sum he had to count down carefully to the very last cent, making sure every single penny went exactly where it needed to go. During the day he served customers, wiped down counters, and wrote up their orders. At night, he searched hard for any kind of stage he could get onto. No medical school was waiting for him anymore, and no clear road was stretching out ahead. He held tightly to the only thing he had left that he could actually sell, and that was the rhythm stored inside his own body. His sister Vilma, who had grown up right alongside him on the wooden floors of their father's dance studio back in Orlando, arrived in New York and became his most natural partner. They formed a performing duo together and boldly decided to call themselves the Ebsen Kids, which was both a daring choice and a pretty risky one at the same time. Starting from cramped little supper clubs where audiences ate their dinners while watching a tiny narrow stage, they slowly worked their way up to crowded vaudeville theaters where the laughter and applause from the crowd could either lift an artist sky high or completely drown them out within just a few minutes. Buddy stood taller than almost every other male performer working at the time. His 6 feet 3 inches frame actually got him rejected from a whole lot of auditions because people simply decided he was unsuitable for what they were looking for. Something that had been a real advantage back home in Orlando had now become a serious obstacle on the stages of Broadway. But he did not shrink away from it or try to hide it. Instead, he figured out how to turn that height into its own unique style and part of his personality. In shows like Whoopee in 1928, then Flying Colors, and then the Ziegfeld Follies of 1934, Buddy's way of moving was completely unlike anyone else performing at the time. Long strides, limbs stretched out as if they were even longer than they actually were, sometimes deliberately moving in a way that was just slightly off the beat, creating an effect that was at once funny and almost dreamlike and strange. He was not dancing just to show off his technical skills. He was telling actual stories with his body, allowing a kind of controlled awkwardness to become his whole personality and his signature on stage. A really positive write-up by the famous columnist Walter Winchell after one of his performances in Atlantic City opened a huge door for him, and that door led straight to the Palace Theater. For any vaudeville performer working during that time, getting onto that stage was about as close to the top of the whole system as you could possibly get. To step onto it meant that your name truly and officially existed in the world of performance. That unconventional style of his did more than just win over theater audiences, though. Walt Disney himself noticed the very specific and unusual way Buddy moved and had him filmed while dancing in front of a grid so that animators could study every single joint in his arms and every single beat of his feet up close. During the late 1920s and into the 1930s, in the era of the Silly Symphony's animated shorts, those careful studies actually helped shape the way animated characters moved on screen, including Mickey Mouse himself. A young man who had once been standing behind a soda fountain counter gradually became an actual inspiration for American animation. Not through any big fancy titles or loud announcements, but through each step he had refined during all those sleepless grinding nights in New York City. The door to Hollywood finally swung open in 1935 when Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer noticed the Ebsen siblings and invited them in for an audition. Vilma eventually stepped away from the heavy machinery of the film world, but Buddy stayed and signed a contract with MGM at a time when that studio completely dominated the musical film genre. For a young man who had once been begging for opportunities on vaudeville stages, entering the tightly closed studio system where everything from the lighting to the costumes to your public image was controlled down to the smallest detail was both a dream finally coming true and a real psychological challenge to get through at the same time. He was no longer a free artist improvising in the moment to the live applause of a crowd. He had to become a product that could be shaped, trimmed, and arranged exactly however the studio needed him to be. In 1936, a film called Born to Dance placed him right among the most prominent faces in MGM musicals. In the big climactic sequences of the film, the tall frame that had once cost him so many roles back on Broadway actually became a huge advantage on the wide movie screen. The cinemascope format highlighted every long stride he took and his somewhat unconventional way of carrying himself. The film was a commercial success, which only reinforced how completely MGM was dominating the musical genre at the time, and Buddy began to be seen as an emerging presence in that world. Not quite an A-list star yet, but distinctive and interesting enough that audiences would remember him. Captain January gave him the chance to dance right alongside Shirley Temple, who was at that point the most powerful child box office star in the entire movie industry. Working right next to a young star whose position was nearly untouchable required a lot of careful restraint on his part. He absolutely could not overshadow her or steal focus away from her in any way. He had to adjust his whole rhythm and energy to support her performance while still finding a way to keep his own personality alive and present in the scene. Those shared scenes actually revealed something important about how well he could control his own energy, knowing exactly when to burst forward and when to step back and let someone else have the moment. By Broadway Melody of 1938, appearing alongside Judy Garland and names like Eleanor Powell and Frances Langford, Buddy stepped into an even more fiercely competitive environment than anything he had faced before. Scenes got rehearsed until everyone was completely exhausted. Every single take had to be absolutely flawless because of the enormous production costs involved and the heavy pressure of box office returns bearing down hard on the entire cast and crew. He was not the center of every single gaze in every scene, but his presence, that upright posture and those movements that were deliberately just a tiny bit off in a subtle way, added a completely different shade to the increasingly polished and perfect world of movie musicals. Not yet 30 years old, Buddy Ebsen was already being considered a rising star of the genre, standing right between MGM's glittering peak of success and the quiet tensions of a system where every opportunity came attached to binding conditions you could not easily escape from. Just as his career was climbing steadily upward, a film that seemed like nothing more than another solid step forward turned into a truly cruel turning point that changed everything. In 1938, Buddy Ebsen was cast in The Wizard of Oz, which was MGM's most ambitious and expensive project at the time. Initially, he was given the role of the Scarecrow, and that casting was the chance for a rising musical star to step directly into the kind of role that gets etched permanently into the history of cinema. But inside the machinery of how roles got assigned and swapped around at MGM, another actor named Ray Bolger expressed a strong desire to switch parts with him. Buddy agreed to give up the Scarecrow role and take on the role of the Tin Man instead, honestly believing that simply being in the film at all was more than enough of an opportunity. He recorded his songs, rehearsed all the choreography, and stepped into the very first days of actual filming completely covered from head to toe in the costume's special makeup. The shimmering metallic look you see on screen was actually created using fine aluminum dust that got applied to his skin and face. Under the blazing intense heat of the studio lights, that metallic powder melted, floated up into the air all around him, and Buddy inhaled it day after day without anyone fully realizing what was happening to him. His body began to react badly. Aches, cramps, and increasingly serious shortness of breath. His lungs got severely damaged as tiny metallic particles lodged deep inside his respiratory tract and started blocking proper oxygen exchange from happening. He ended up hospitalized for 2 full weeks, confined inside an oxygen tent just to keep breathing, and then spent 6 more weeks recovering in a seriously weakened state. Meanwhile, the film simply could not stop production for him. MGM replaced him with an actor named Jack Haley and changed the makeup formula to make it safer for the new performer. Most of the dialogue and songs got re-recorded from scratch, but in a few group ensemble passages you can still actually hear Buddy's original voice if you listen carefully, a faint little trace left behind from a role that might have completely and totally changed the entire direction of his life. The studio downplayed the whole terrible incident and described it publicly as just a simple allergic reaction. But the real damage done to his lungs was absolutely far from simple, and it stayed with him and affected him for the entire rest of his life. That disaster was not even the final collision he would face during this rough period. When the studio head Louis B. Mayer offered him an exclusive contract that would have given MGM near total control over every aspect of his career, Buddy flat out refused to sign it. In the studio system of